have like preconceived notions of interracial couples?
No.
No,
Not anymore. You know, I think I went through a phase where I had to label everything, and then I try to pick pieces of it that I identify with and pieces that I didn't. And I was driving myself crazy because I'm OCD, and so I just kept doing that over and over again. And you know, I would mention certain things to my girlfriend, and she's like, "Yeah, it's like if it fits anywhere, it's whatever." And I thought, you are so uneducated. What do you mean that it goes, you know, anywhere? There's no such thing as fluidity. You got to be able to put it in a box somewhere. Now I realize she's highly evolved.
I think when we're young, we always try to think everything through to the end and try to have a conclusion for everything, but then we realize we can't.
But don't you feel like there are people out there who still think interracial
definitely.
dating is like
Well, because it's
weird.
very racist world. You know,
Especially,
it's a
I would
reality.
think in the Midwest, people are not as progressive.
Actually, I don't know if that's true. It seems like it is. There might be more extreme examples, but actually I feel like Los Angeles is probably one of the most racist places I've ever lived in my life.
Really?
And I've lived in Florida. I think that LA is very ghettoized. People are very separate. It's very segregated. And, I mean, I think whites and Asians live together a lot, but Latinos and blacks versus, I mean, like, also based on, like, socioeconomic backgrounds and things, like, the city is very divided and fighting all the time. And, you know.
I think it is beautiful, you know, interracial couples, you know, but
Well, obviously, but that's not even something you have to say, because
yeah.
that's kind of like...
But he does repeatedly.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like saying to...
Because I feel like I always
But
constantly have to defend myself.
Yeah, but you don't have to defend yourself. You have to
You know?
just be who you are. It's fine to talk about it, but I feel like if someone came up to me and be like, "Oh, I think it's okay that you're gay," I'd be like, "Who cares? Fuck you. Of course it's okay. You don't have to tell me, and I don't need your approval." Same kind of thing. Like, you don't have to get people's approval.
That's good. So, what do you think about, the gay community in general?
You should
and
say
then
queer community, by the
Queer
way.
community in general, and how different queer groups relate to one another. Because recently, for a gender sexuality conference, I did a documentary on transgendered people. And I noticed that they don't feel like they're very included by the LGBT community.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think especially because you were mostly interviewing trans men.
Right.
And I think if anyone is ostracized in the queer community, a lot of trans people don't identify as queer, so I mean, we have to make that clear.
You don't think they do?
A lot, and some people don't, and it's like a personal choice. You know, whatever you identify as is what we should respect. But basically, I think that trans men are just completely on the fringes. But what happens is, like they probably talked about with you, you get kind of a helicopter theory thing. Once gay men and lesbians rise above everybody else, they kind of just fly away, and they leave everybody else who hasn't risen to the kind of privilege level.
And why don't
leave them
you
behind.
think they like help those people that are still left behind?
Well, it brings you down in a way. That's what people think. You know, I mean, I don't think that's true, but I think. Well, like a good example is the Human Rights Campaign. They used to just be a gay and lesbian organization, and then they asked bisexuals and transgender people, "Okay, who wants to be part of us more?" They're like, "We're only going to pick one of you two because it's too controversial to have both." And they ended up first picking bisexuals, and then someone sued, and then they had to do both. But to this day, people hold that against them, and I think they should, because that was a big mistake, and they really haven't atoned for that.
Right.
But that's the kind of thing, like, they feel, the Human Rights Campaign, that they have to be relatively conservative in order to be able to put their message out there with conservative crowds, like senators, so they don't feel like they should be helping bisexual and transgender people at all.
So as gay men, how do you think we can, make it more friendly for the trans community?
I think one of the major things is there's no visibility of the trans community, that besides like shows like Springer and things like that, like really bad. So
There was that movie Transamerica.
yeah, and there's lots
That
of
was a really
it's
good
getting
movie, too.
there.
Yeah, it is finally.
But I think one thing is, like, I don't necessarily identify as a gay man anyways. Like, I identify as queer because that way it's more broad. I think that's one thing we can do too,
Weren't you?
to be less specific.
I was talking to you the other day, and you mentioned this term called genderqueer.
Yeah.
Can you go into that?
Well, I identify as genderqueer because I feel like the male and female polarities, like the binary gender system, is too restrictive. And even though if I had to choose, between male and female, I would probably pick male. Sometimes I feel like it's better for me to have a more complicated term because I don't think gender is that simple. So I'm not going to pick something as simple as male or female. And genderqueer is kind of a way to go.
But do you think people, when you tell people that you are genderqueer, do you think they would look at you weird, like an alien?
Yeah, they
or
probably
something?
will. But you know, people will look at you weird probably no matter what. And it's what's
Well,
funny
but
is that I'm
would
not
it make
changing
you-
the way I look or act or speak. It's just a term, and I usually only use it around people who would understand it anyways.
Because I remember you telling me over dinner
Yeah,
that
you were like, "What is that?"
Yeah, and I was like, genderqueer, but you're a male, Jeremy. You have a penis, you know. You don't have like tits and a penis, you know, like.
But
You were born
you
a
pick whatever
male.
term you want, and for me, it's more of a political thing. And gender
political,
is
okay.
not what you have physically. Gender is
That's
what you
true.
express. And in terms of gender, I feel like the term male is way too restrictive.
So is it kind of like you're just rebelling against like the gender
I guess
binary?
you can call it that. It's like a personal choice, you know. It's like if your favorite colors can only be black or white, and you say gray.
I see.
Yeah.
Why do you think America has such a gender binary? And because in other countries, right, there's
I think it's a Judeo-Christian thing. I think it's all the Abrahamic religions have very strict male and female, and
Really?
and especially because we were founded by Protestants, I think it really carried over into us. If you compare that to like animistic religions, like in Southeast Asia, in North America before whites arrived, there usually was 3 or 4 genders. Buddhism has 3 genders in
Like
some places.
in India,
Hinduism, yeah, I mean
right?
there's Hijra people
Right.
who until relatively recently, until colonization, were treated with high respect and even fear because they had a position of power, which they don't really now. So I think that's what it is mostly.
Because of
I mean,
our
I think that's where
religion.
the gender binary comes from in the West. We had Adam and Eve. We didn't have Adam and Eve and 2 other people like in Thailand they used to. I mean, it's not Adam and Eve, but there was male, female, and then there's like physically hermaphrodite people and also kind of emotionally. And that's like if you look at really old texts that are like 5,000 years old, written on like, I think, banana leaves in Khmer. They talk about this. I did a project about this. So there's like 4 genders, and it's carried over until today, I think.
Okay, so you always talk about wanting to live in Japan, right, and moving to Japan. Why?
Is this a Jeremy show or something? I'm like talking about myself.
Why don't you like America? Like, why do you just love Japan so much?
Well, I think we just talked about one of the reasons. I think America is a country where masculinity is very valued, and a certain kind of masculinity is very valued.
And in Japan, it's not like that.
Well, Japan, obviously, masculinity is also very valued. I think Japan is just as sexist as the U.S. I don't want to make any excuses. But in America, there's only one way to be male. In Japan, there's definitely more than one.
What do you mean?
Especially if I'm a foreigner. I do have a foreigner kind of privilege, which is really unfair. But living there, being gay and feminine is perfectly fine. I would never be beat up, made fun of, or discriminated against. For
Really?
that. Definitely not. And if it does happen, it'd be very rare. Whereas here, you do risk your life to a certain extent if you walk around the wrong places.
So is that one of the main reasons?
That's
you
definitely
wanna
one of the
move
main
to Japan?
reasons. But then also I want to be in Japan. You know, like
And
it's
you
not
find
just
Asian
running
guys
away.
attractive.
That's not why I'm moving to Japan. Then I would probably move to another place in Asia.
Like where? Thailand? They have
No,
money boys over there.
I wouldn't do something like that. I don't believe in buying sex because it's kind of like colonization all over again.
It's kind of like exploitation.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's literally colonization. You're paying people for stuff that people need money.
But at the same
And-
time, that keeps Thailand, like, that generates its revenue, does
No,
it
actually,
not?
85% of prostitution in Thailand is local. So it doesn't take, the money doesn't come in from somewhere else. It's just
Okay.
rolls around.
Right. But do you think that without foreigners, foreigners, those money boys would starve to death?
No. I think you create a market. When there's a need, there's like going to be a supply. If there's no need for it, there's not going to be a supply. People would do something else.
Do you think so?
And I also think
so how do you think
it's not a
So how do you think that
no.
market got started in the first place?
Well,
The
there's-
white people or
Well,
the money
I mean, every
boys?
country has always had prostitution, but
But
during
why is it so crazy
okay,
down there?
because during the Vietnam War, during the Vietnam War, there was rest and relief, right? Or what was it called?
Western relief?
Rest and relief.
Okay.
It's basically all the American soldiers from the Vietnam War went to Thailand,
Okay.
to Pattaya, which was developed at that time. And there was a huge prostitution industry that boomed, mostly for women, but also for transgender women and men, also whatever, you know. I mean, obviously these soldiers had lots of money. They were coming to Thailand, and Thailand was supplying them with something. But it's easy to just blame only the West. But I mean, prostitution's always existed in Thailand.
What do you think about the money boys? Do you think?
Well, I don't think we should call them money boys. They're commercial sex workers. That's the proper term we should use.
Okay. Well, what do you think about those commercial sex workers?
Well, I think if people want to become a sex worker, they should have the right to. But I don't think people do it because they want to. I think they have a socioeconomic
You think they don't have
need.
another choice?
If you're coming from the countryside, you have no money, and your family basically owes, say $100,000, baht, but to a mafia person who lent them money, you have to sell your child to the prostitution rings to pay them back. And they'll give you the money, they'll give you all the cash, and then you have to pay them back. So it's just like transferring debt from one person to another. And that's why people do it, because they need money fast. It happens in Japan, too. Girls who need cash will, they'll take $100,000 from the Yakuza and they become a prostitute and they can never pay it back.
I read this one book by Daniel Gothrop, The Rice Queen Diaries. Are you familiar with that book? So basically, he was talking about his journey in Thailand and him discovering himself and what he was attracted to. And I guess he said something along the lines like, a lot of the commercial sex workers, they do it because they don't want to face reality. Because if they're not commercial sex workers, then they're basically just farm laborers.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on it, but I think most people don't do it out of choice. It's the despair. If you need money bad,
but then
if someone's going to come and kill you if you don't give them money, then you will do it.
But then not all those families have such extreme cases as you're mentioning.
Well, there's a lot of college students who do it for extra cash. There's a lot of, I'm kind of mentioning the extreme cases, but that stuff does exist and we can't just ignore it. I don't think people do it because they're lost touch with reality or anything. I think they're perfectly aware of the fact of what they're doing, but they
because
don't
when they are commercial sex workers, they do live in their minds, I guess, a better life than just because when they're
it depends
sex workers,
where you're working.
It
depends who your clients are.
Right.
And you might not necessarily be making more money.
And sometimes they're not even sex workers. They are just they are just boyfriends of I read about this one kid in Thailand. He had 20-something boyfriends around the world that was sending him money every single week. Of course that's an extreme case.
Yeah.
But I can see how those commercial sex workers can be exploiting.
Well, yeah. Well, I'd do it if there was no STDs and stuff. If there was no STDs and no violence,
commercial sex worker.
I wouldn't mind trying it. So we have 1 minute. Okay, we'll just end on that. There's nothing wrong with it. I feel like if I wasn't going to be exploited, then it's fine. But that's the thing. It's very problematic. We have to problematize the situation, and we can't think about it on simple terms because it's not simple. There's all sorts of different kinds of levels of prostitution, and most of the time it's not very fun.
So if you have to pick 3 words to describe yourself.
On a different topic. Artist, friend, and humanitarian.
What were the first 2?
Artist and friend. I guess friend and humanitarian is really similar, but
mine would be probably spicy, wild.
Yours are so different.
Spicy, wild.
Sriracha sauce.
And wonton. Bye! Thanks for tuning in. Tune in next week. Bobby Trending will be on.
He is? If he agrees, he hasn't.
If he agrees, Bobby Trending will be on, but we don't know that though.
We talked about such serious stuff today.
That was good, huh?
Bobby Trending.